أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل هو الله أحد الله الصمد لم يلد ولم يولد ولم يكن له كفوا أحد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الفلق من شر ما خلق ومن شر غاسق إذا وقب ومن شر النفثات في العقد ومن شر حاسد إذا حسد. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس ملك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. قل أعوذ برب الناس مالك الناس إله الناس من شر الوسواس الخناس الذي يوسوس في صدور الناس من الجنة والناس. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك رب يحضرون. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك رب يحضرون. ربي أعوذ بك من همزات الشياطين وأعوذ بك رب يحضرون. أفحسبتم أنما خلقناكم عبثا وأنكم إلينا لا ترجعون. فتعالى الله الملك الحق لا إله إلا هو رب العرش الكريم. ومن يدعو مع الله إلها آخر لا برهان له به فإنما حسابه عند ربه إنه لا يفلح الكافرون. وقل رب اغفر وارحم وأنت خير الراحمين. فسبحان الله حين تمسون وحين تصبحون وله الحمد في السماوات والأرض وعشيا وحين تظهرون. يخرج الحي من الميت ويخرج الميت من الحي ويحيي الأرض بعد موتها وكذلك تخرجون. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم. لو أنزلنا هذا القرآن على جبل لرأيته خاشعا متصدعا من خشية الله وتلك الأمثال نضربها للناس لعلهم يتفكرون. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو عالم الغيب والشهادة هو الرحمن الرحيم. هو الله الذي لا إله إلا هو الملك القدوس السلام المؤمن المهيمن العزيز الجبار المتكبر سبحان الله عما يشركون. هو الله الخالق البارئ المصور له الأسماء الحسنى يسبح له ما في السماوات والأرض وهو العزيز الحكيم. سلام على نوح في العالمين إنا كذلك نجزي المحسنين إنه من عبادنا المؤمنين. أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق. أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق. أعوذ بكلمات الله التامات من شر ما خلق. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. بسم الله الذي لا يضر مع اسمه شيء في الأرض ولا في السماء وهو السميع العليم. اللهم إني أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتمم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتمم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أصبحت منك في نعمة وعافية وستر فأتمم نعمتك علي وعافيتك وسترك في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك، وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. اللهم إني أصبحت أشهدك وأشهد حملة عرشك وملائكتك وجميع خلقك أنك أنت الله لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك، وأن سيدنا محمدا عبدك ورسولك. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيدا. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيدا. الحمد لله رب العالمين حمدا يوافي نعمه ويكافئ مزيدا. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله سميع عليم. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله السميع العليم. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله السميع العليم. آمنت بالله العظيم وكفرت بالجبت والطاغوت واستمسكت بالعروة الوثقى لا انفصام لها والله السميع العليم. رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا. رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا. رضيت بالله ربا وبالإسلام دينا وبسيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم نبيا ورسولا. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. حسبي الله لا إله إلا هو عليه توكلت وهو رب العرش العظيم. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وآله وصحبه وسلم. 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 اللهم إني أسألك من فجاءة الخير وأعوذ بك من فجاءة الشر. اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت خلقتني وأنا عبدك وأنا على عهدك ووعدك ما استطعت. أعوذ بك من شر ما صنعت أبوء لك بنعمتك علي وأبوء بذنبي فاغفر لي فإنه لا يغفر الذنوب إلا أنت. اللهم أنت ربي لا إله إلا أنت عليك توكلت وأنت رب العرش العظيم. ما شاء الله كان وما لم يشاء لم يكن ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. أعلم أن الله على كل شيء قدير وأن الله قد أحاط بكل شيء علما. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من شر نفسي ومن شر كل دابة أنت آخذ بناصيتها إن ربي على صراط مستقيم. يا حي يا قيوم برحمتك أستغيث من عذابك أستجير أصلح لي شأني كله ولا تكلني إلى نفسي ولا إلى أحد من خلقك طرفة عين. اللهم إني أعوذ بك من الهم والحزن وأعوذ بك من العجز والكسل وأعوذ بك من الجبن والبخل وأعوذ بك من غلبة الدين وقهر الرجال. اللهم إني أسألك العافية في الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم إني أسألك العفو والعافية والمعافاة الدائمة في ديني ودنياي وأهلي ومالي. اللهم استر عوراتي وآمن روعاتي. اللهم احفظني من بين يدي ومن خلفي وعن يميني وعن شمالي ومن فوقي وأعوذ بعظمتك أن أغتال من تحتي. اللهم أنت ربي أنت خلقتني وأنت تهديني وأنت تطعمني وأنت تسقيني وأنت تميتني وأنت تحييني وأنت على كل شيء قدير. أصبحنا على فطرة الإسلام وعلى كلمة الإخلاص وعلى دين نبينا محمد صلى الله عليه وآله وسلم وعلى ملة أبينا إبراهيم حنيفا مسلما وما كان من المشركين. اللهم بك أصبحنا وبك أمسينا وبك نحيا وبك نموت وعليك نتوكل وإليك النشور. أصبحنا أصبح الملك لله، الحمد لله رب العالمين. اللهم إني أسألك خير هذا اليوم، فتحه ونصره ونوره وبركته وهداه. اللهم إني أسألك خير هذا اليوم وخير ما فيه وخير ما قبله وخير ما بعده، وأعوذ بك من شر هذا اليوم وشر ما فيه وشر ما قبله وشر ما بعده. اللهم ما أصبح بي من نعمة أو بأحد من خلقك فمنك وحدك لا شريك لك، فلك الحمد ولك الشكر على ذلك. سبحان الله بحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله بحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله بحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله بحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله العظيم وبحمده عدد خلقه ورضا نفسه وزنة عرشه ومداد كلماته. سبحان الله عدد ما خلق في السماء، سبحان الله عدد ما خلق في الأرض، سبحان الله عدد ما بين ذلك، سبحان الله عدد ما هو خالق. الحمد لله عدد ما خلق في السماء، الحمد لله عدد ما خلق في الأرض، الحمد لله عدد ما بين ذلك، الحمد لله عدد ما هو خالق. لا إله إلا الله عدد ما خلق في السماء، لا إله إلا الله عدد ما خلق في الأرض، لا إله إلا الله عدد ما بين ذلك، لا إله إلا الله عدد ما هو خالق. الله أكبر عدد ما خلق في السماء، الله أكبر عدد ما خلق في الأرض، الله أكبر عدد ما بين ذلك، الله أكبر عدد ما هو خالق. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما خلق في السماء، لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما خلق في الأرض، لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما بين ذلك، لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم عدد ما هو خالق. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وعلى كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وعلى كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، له الملك وله الحمد يحيي ويميت وهو على كل شيء قدير عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله، صلاة وسلاما دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عد ما في علم الله، صلاة وسلاما دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. اللهم صل وسلم على سيدنا محمد مفتاح باب رحمة الله عدد ما في علم الله، صلاة وسلاما دائمين بدوام ملك الله وعلى آله وصحبه عدد كل ذرة ألف مرة. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. ياسين والقرآن الحكيم إنك لمن المرسلين على صراط مستقيم. تنزيل العزيز الرحيم لتنذر قوما ما أنذر آباؤهم فهم غافلون. لقد حق القول على أكثرهم فهم لا يؤمنون. إنا جعلنا في أعناقهم أغلالا فهي إلى الأذقان فهم مقمحون. وجعلنا من بين أيديهم سدا ومن خلفهم سدا فأغشيناهم فهم لا يبصرون. وسواء عليهم أأنذرتهم أم لم تنذرهم لا يؤمنون. إنما تنذر من اتبع الذكر وخشي الرحمن بالغيب فبشره بمغفرة وأجر كريم. إنا نحن نحيي الموتى ونكتب ما قدموا وآثارهم وكل شيء أحصيناه في إمام مبين. واضرب لهم مثلا أصحاب القرية إذ جاءها المرسلون إذ أرسلنا إليهم اثنين فكذبوهما فعززنا بثالث فقالوا إنا إليكم مرسلون. قالوا ما أنتم إلا بشر مثلنا وما أنزل الرحمن من شيء إن أنتم إلا تكذبون. قالوا ربنا يعلم إنا إليكم لمرسلون وما علينا إلا البلاغ المبين. قالوا إنا تطيرنا بكم لئن لم تنتهوا لنرجمنكم وليمسنكم منا عذاب أليم. قالوا طائركم معكم أئن ذكرتم بل أنتم قوم مسرفون. وجاء من أقصى المدينة رجل يسعى قال يا قوم اتبعوا المرسلين اتبعوا من لا يسألكم أجرا وهم مهتدون. وما لي لا أعبد الذي فطرني وإليه ترجعون. أتخذ من دونه آلهة إن يردنا الرحمن بضر لا تغني عني شفاعتهم شيئا ولا ينقذون. إني إذا لفي ضلال مبين. إني آمنت بربكم فاسمعون. قيل ادخل الجنة قال يا ليت قومي يعلمون بما غفر لي ربي وجعلني من المكرمين. وما أنزلنا على قومه من بعده من جند من السماء وما كنا منزلين. كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم خامدون. يا حسرة على العباد ما يأتيهم من رسول إلا كانوا به يستهزئون. ألم يروا كم أهلكنا قبلهم من القرون أنهم إليهم لا يرجعون. وإن كل لما جميع لدينا محضرون. وآية لهم الأرض الميتة أحييناها وأخرجنا منها حبا فمنه يأكلون. وجعلنا فيها جنات من نخيل وأعناب وفجرنا فيها من العيون ليأكلوا من ثمره وما عملت أيديهم أفلا يشكرون. سبحان الذي خلق الأزواج كلها مما تنبت الأرض من أنفسهم ومما لا يعلمون. وآية لهم الليل نسلخ منه النهار فإذا هم مظلمون. والشمس تجري لمستقر لها ذلك تقدير العزيز العليم. والقمر قدرناه منازل حتى عاد كالعرجون القديم. لا الشمس ينبغي لها أن تدرك القمر ولا الليل سابق النهار وكل في فلك يسبحون. وآية لهم أنا حملنا ذريتهم في الفلك المشحون وخلقنا لهم من مثله ما يركبون وإن نشأ نغرقهم فلا صريخ لهم ولا هم ينقذون إلا رحمة منا ومتاعا إلى حين. وإذا قيل لهم اتقوا ما بين أيديكم وما خلفكم لعلكم ترحمون. وما تأتيهم من آية من آيات ربهم إلا كانوا عنها معرضين. وإذا قيل لهم أنفقوا مما رزقكم الله قال الذين كفروا للذين آمنوا أنطعم من لا يشاء الله أطعمه إن أنتم إلا في ضلال مبين. ويقولون متى هذا الوعد إن كنتم صادقين. ما ينظرون إلا صيحة واحدة تأخذهم وهم يخصمون فلا يستطيعون توصية ولا إلى أهلهم يرجعون. ونفخ في الصور فإذا هم من الأجداث إلى ربهم ينسلون. قالوا يا ويلنا من بعثنا من مرقدنا هذا ما وعد الرحمن وصدق المرسلون. إن كانت إلا صيحة واحدة فإذا هم جميع لدينا محضرون. فاليوم لا تظلم نفس شيئا ولا تجزون إلا ما كنتم تعملون. إن أصحاب الجنة اليوم في شغل فاكهون. هم وأزواجهم في ظلال على الأرائك متكئون. هم فيها فاكهة ولهم ما يدعون. سلام قولا من رب رحيم. وامتازوا اليوم أيها المجرمون. ألم أعهد إليكم يا بني آدم ألا تعبدوا الشيطان إنه لكم عدو مبين وأن اعبدوني هذا صراط مستقيم. ولقد أضل منكم جبلا كثيرا أفلم تكونوا تعقلون. هذه جهنم التي كنتم توعدون اصلوها اليوم بما كنتم تكفرون. اليوم نختم على أفواههم وتكلمنا أيديهم وتشهد أرجلهم بما كانوا يكسبون. ولو نشاء لطمسنا على أعينهم فاستبقوا الصراط فأنى يبصرون ولو نشاء لمسخناهم على مكانتهم فما استطاعوا مضيا ولا يرجعون من نعمره ننكس في الخلق أفلا يعقلون وما علمناه الشعر وما ينبغي له إن هو إلا ذكر وقرآن مبين لينذر من كان حيا ويحق القول على الكافرين أولم يروا أنا خلقنا لهم مما عملت أيدينا أنعاما فهم لها مالكون ذللناها لهم فمنها ركوبهم ومنها يأكلون ولهم فيها منافع ومشارب أفلا يشكرون واتخذوا من دون الله آلهة لعلهم ينصرون لا يستطيعون نصرهم وهم لهم جند محضرون ولا يحزنك قولهم إنا نعلم ما يسرون وما يعلنون أولم ير الإنسان أنا خلقناه من نطفة فإذا هو خصيم مبين وضرب لنا مثلا ونسي خلقه قال من يحيي العظام وهي رميم قل يحييها الذي أنشأها أول مرة وهو بكل خلق عليم الذي جعل لكم من الشجر الأخضر نارا فإذا أنتم منه توقدون أوليس الذي خلق السماوات والأرض بقادر على أن يخلق مثلهم بلى وهو الخلاق العليم إنما أمره إذا أراد شيئا أن يقول له كن فيكون فسبحان الذي بيده ملكوت كل شيء وإليه ترجعون اللهم إنا نستحفظك ونستودعك أدياننا وأبداننا وأنفسنا وأهلنا وأولادنا وأموالنا وكل شيء أعطيتنا اللهم اجعلنا وإياهم في كنفك وأمانك وعياذك من كل شيطان مريد وجبار عنيد وذي بغي وذي حسد ومن شر كل ذي شر إنك على كل شيء قدير اللهم جملنا بالعافية والسلامة وحققنا بالتقوى والاستقامة وأعدنا من موجبات الندامة إنك سميع الدعاء اللهم اغفر لنا ولوالدينا وأولادنا ومشايخنا وإخواننا في الدين وأصحابنا ولمن أحبنا فيك ولمن أحسن إلينا والمؤمنين والمؤمنات والمسلمين والمسلمات يا رب العالمين صل اللهم على عبدك ورسولك سيدنا ومولانا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم وارزقنا كمال المتابعة له ظاهرا وباطنا في عافية وسلامة برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. الحمد لله الحمد لله والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Anybody who wants a copy of this Adhkar, which now we've put into one PDF, as you notice, we've put this into one PDF. Um, before that, it was in two different PDFs, or three different PDFs, which was annoying that we had to keep going. All you have to do is simply send us an email, mbic.clips@gmail.com, and we'll send it over to you. All right, we'll send it over to you. So today, it's very important for us to realize the time that we're in and the era that we're in, and we have to realize what's going on. And one of the things that are happening today is that the Muslims are isolated. We're isolated from so many little protections. Every interaction in the masajid was a protection. Every time Muslims say salam to each other, that's a dua. Every time we attend Jum'ah, there is maghfirah. Every time that we go for a Jama'ah prayer, there's maghfirah. There's so many various little protections that are no longer available to us. And so we have to make up for that. And this is also a time that is of bala, on trial, and everybody has to pull hard in dua. Okay, everyone's got to pitch in, and you have to remember yourself, you have to remember your family, and don't say, okay, oh, but I have sins. Dua isn't about that. Dua is it's the greatest acts of ibadah because you're putting yourself in humility. You're not presenting a pearl. You're presenting yourself as a beggar. Okay. In fact, sometimes the people who have no arrogance because they know that they're sinful, sometimes that actually they end up having the most pure dua because they know that they're so in need and so unworthy. Whereas someone else might come and feel worthy and approach Allah Ta'ala with worthiness. Okay. Um, they feel that they like they deserve an answer. Okay, and that actually might cause them not to have enough, not to have their dua answered. So we have to go to Allah Ta'ala with humility and remember everybody in your family. Don't forget anybody. Don't leave out anybody because you're annoyed by them or you don't like them. This is not any normal time that we're living in. We're having a serious situation in which both the outward and the inward is in a complete turmoil. The outward, as you could see, if you're living in the United States, all the looting and the rioting and all these things, okay, it's turmoil. Well, inwardly as well, there's turmoil. In the ummah, there's turmoil. Spiritually, there's turmoil. So it's a time that you need to protect yourself from. May Allah Ta'ala protect everybody from humiliation, from indignities, from disgrace, from poverty, from going astray, from hard-heartedness, from turning away turning away from the deen, turning away from the sunnah, from dropping out, from losing our rizq, from entering into poverty. This is one of the greatest fitna, is that a person falls into poverty. And as soon as he falls into poverty, where does his iman go? Right? That's why the Prophet ﷺ said, كَادَ الْكُفْرُ أَنْ يَكُونَ كَادَ الْفَقْرُ أَنْ يَكُونَ كُفْرًا, which means that poverty, it could actually put a mu'min into such a tailspin that even thoughts of kufr or even kufr itself comes upon him. Right? كَادَ الْفَقْرُ أَنْ يَكُونَ كُفْرًا. So we have to ask for our livelihoods to be preserved. May Allah preserve everyone's livelihood who attends this dhikr, and everyone who, and their families and the communities, and everyone who is our friend and who owes us a favor, or to whom we owe a favor, whoever did anything good to us, and whoever loves us, and whoever helped us in the past, and everyone who's in our household, and everyone who's in our family and community and neighborhood, and the ummah at large. May Allah protect us from poverty, because poverty, it leads people to do acts and to go places and to do things they wouldn't have ever done before, right? By necessity. And it may not be right away. These might be things that happen over time, right? These might be things that happen slowly. One move, right? One change may lead to a second change, to a third, to a fourth, and put yourself away from put yourself out of a distance from a community that you might benefit from, right? That's what jobs do. That's what work does to people. It forces people. It might have to force people to go, somewhere far away. It might force people to go somewhere away from where they were benefiting from. Let me read to you a dua that I shared yesterday publicly. This is a very important dua. Ya Latif ultuf bina fima jarat bihi al-maqadir. Okay. And this is based upon Imam al-Shafi'i. These are the words of Imam al-Shafi'i. That he was at one point living in Yemen and was somehow caught up with the wrong group of people. Not himself, he went with them, but he himself was just, I guess, mistaken identity, or he was just wrong place, wrong time. For some reason or other, he ends up being with this wrong crowd. And he ends up being charged with a crime. And he's sitting there. He doesn't know anybody. Nobody knows him. He doesn't have any local connections. And so he's sitting there about to be found guilty of this crime, and they're going to be killed. Okay. And when he gets there into the court, he just starts saying this dua, Ya Latif bina fima jarat bihi al-maqadir. And he continues simply to say this over and over and over and over and over again, until finally the governor, and those times the governor and the judge used to be like one person. Sometimes the governor, the judge, somebody calls him over, And he comes to him and he starts to speak. And the governor realizes this is not some kind of a criminal. This is a great scholar. And so the governor then, or the judge, releases him after some discussion and some talking. So this dua therefore started to spread amongst the people. When they heard that, they realized this dua is special. And let me explain it exactly what's the meaning, especially of these last words that you may have not been accustomed to, and the concept. The concept is as follows. The idea is as follows. Bala, tribulations and trials, they descend from the sky upon human beings in the form of a subtle substance, and then they take their form in events and occurrences. Okay, so the Prophet ﷺ described bala as literally a thing. We don't see it, but it is like a cloud that comes down, or like a type of darkness that comes down on people. And then when it settles upon in their environment and it takes on a form, it takes on it infuses into an event, and it develops into an incident. And that incident therefore starts affecting people's lives adversely. However, he also said an extremely important statement for us, and which he repeated many times in the Sunnah, in the Seerah: ad-du'a yaruddu al-bala. Okay, and in another hadith, la yaruddu al-qada illa ad-du'a. That whenever qada and qadar, and when the Prophet says qada and qadar, he means bad things. Whenever bad things descend upon us, nothing can stop it except dua. And then he said in another hadith, لا يزال دعاء المؤمن والقدر يعتلجان في السماء إلى يوم القيامة. It will always be that the dua of a mu'min and the qadr, the bala that comes down upon him, will wrestle in the sky until the Yawm al-Qiyamah. So that tells us what is the dua. Dua itself, when it's uttered, comes from the heart of a mu'min, and it takes on a form. And that form is also of the unseen realm, and it can wrestle, it can block, it can obstruct the bala. It's a positive that is attracted to the negative. Okay? Just like in magnetism, negatives and positives attract. If there are negative things coming down and you're sending positives up, what happens? Right? The positive attracts to the negative, and it blocks it, and it stays there forever. Your dua stays there forever. And what does it mean? The Prophet ﷺ says, until yom ya'tarijani fi as-sama' ila yawm al-qiyamah. It means that your dua, you send it up once, but it will continue there and hope, and it will stay there until yawm al-qiyamah, meaning that you will continue your entire life, and that bala will be blocked for your entire life. It will never come down to you. So that means it was destined. So it came down to the sky of the earth, but it never affected you. It never touched you. And this is how we understand. So if it was destined, then how can we stop it? Yes, it was destined to come down upon this earth. It doesn't necessarily mean it was destined to touch you. There's a big difference. So, I mean, you have a thunderstorm comes down. It's destined to come down. Yeah, but it didn't touch you because you have a roof. Right? It doesn't touch you. That's the difference. And that's what dua it does. And that's the importance of dua, is that it's coming down either way, whether we know it or not, whether we like it or not. And then with the absence of things like Hajj, where people are making dua for the Ummah at Hajj, with the absence of all the other things that are going on, like, Umrah. We don't know the status of Hajj yet. With the absence of all these other things, we're not benefiting from the collective Ummah-wide dua anymore. That people are saying, Fatiha, what is Surah Al-Fatiha? It's Ummah-wide dua. Don't underestimate that these are dua that people are uttering, and they're constantly going up. When they're going up by the billion, and millions every single day, that forms a barrier. Okay? So it's now upon us to replace that by sending those barriers up. So don't underestimate that. Make it a daily routine to constantly be uttering and reciting any type of dua for family, for friends, for community, and remember them by name, remember them by their faces, whatever it is, and we make dua for our deen, number one, our reputations, our deen, our dunya, okay, our health. You need health, okay, and the protection also. If you were to see somebody, if there was a boulder coming and rolling down the street, you would warn everybody. You wouldn't warn just one person. You'd warn, anyone who was around you. You wouldn't limit it. So likewise, these types of things you need to don't limit your protection, and say, oh, I'm only going to protect myself. I'm only going to protect myself. You're going to, of course, put the Muslims first and the Ummah first, but it's not going to be limited. Okay, so make dua for everybody around you, in your neighborhood, in your country, and in your city, because we live in these cities and we need to, live in safe spaces. No one wants to live in an area that's dangerous, and we can't afford to have an sort of dismissive attitude about the lands around us. We're living in these countries, and we need to benefit to live safely. So you need to extend your dua to the entire country that you live in, and the entire city that you live in. All right, let's do a shift now, and let's read from the stories of the awliya, because this is also part of it, because the stories of the salihin and the awliya is something that it also removes negativity, removes bala, it removes anything that is the opposite of rahmah. And today we'll read a little bit from the story of Ahmad al-Alawi. It's one of the first stories of the awliya that I ever read, actually. And it's an amazing story. It's very simple, actually. And his image is extremely striking. Let me get you another image of Sidi Ahmad al-Alawi, which is from his older age. He's extremely striking in at least this picture. If you look at this picture here, it's almost like completely sage-like. Let me get it for you. Here it is. It's a famous picture that was taken of him. Let me get it for you. Second. Boom. All right. Take a look at this picture. He's extremely sage-like if you look at it. He's wearing a turban, and then he's covered it with a shawl, right? He's got very simple clothes, and his beard has all whitened except for 2 spots. And he's wearing very simple clothes. So that's Sheikh Ahmad al-Alawi, right? All right, so now let's go over to the biography and read a little bit from it. Sheikh was born in Mustaghnam, I think it's Mustaghnam, in Algeria in 1869. His name, as given on the title pages of most of his books, was Abu al-Abbas Ahmad ibn Mustafa al-Alawi, and he was an only son with 2 sisters. A little less than a year before his birth, his mother Fatima saw in her sleep the Prophet ﷺ with a jonquil, which is a flower of some sort, in his hand. He looked her in the face and smiled at her and threw the flower to her, whereupon she took it up with her with humble modesty. When she woke, she told her husband of the vision, and he interpreted it as meaning that they would be blessed with a pious son. And he had in fact been importuning Allah not to leave him without an heir. And after a few weeks, God confirmed her dream, and she conceived her son. After the Sheikh's death in 1934, the following autobiographical extract was found among his papers. He had evidently dictated it some years previously to one of his disciples. As to learning how to write, he says, I never made much effort in that direction, and I never went to school, not even for a single day. My only schooling was what I learned from my father at home during the Quran lessons which he used to give me, and my handwriting is still quite unproficient. So he's not a lettered man, he's not a man of letters. My learning by heart the Book of Allah went as far as Surat Ar-Rahman, and there I came to a standstill owing to various occupations which I was forced to turn to through sheer necessity. So they were not a wealthy family and they needed to work. The family had not enough to live on, although you would never have thought it, for my father was proud and reserved to the point of never showing on his face what was in his mind, so that nobody could have concluded from outward signs that he was in any need of it, or he was in need of anything. I hesitated between several different crafts and finally took to cobbling and became quite good at it, and our situation improved in consequence. I remained a cobbler for a few years and then went into trade, and I lost my father when I was just 16. Although I was so young, I had been doing all sorts of things for him, and I was bent on nothing so much as giving him pleasure. He was exceedingly fond of me, and I do not remember him ever blaming me for anything or beating me except when he was giving me lessons, and then it was because I was lazy in learning the Quran. As to my mother, she was even more lavish in her affection, and she worried more about me than he had done. In fact, after his death, she did all she could in the way of harsh words and blows and locking the door, so on, to prevent me from going out at night. I wanted very much to humor her, but I could not bring myself to give up attending lessons at night and gatherings for dhikr. SubhanAllah, this is what he wanted to go to when his mother's yelling at him to keep him home. What made her so anxious was that our house was outside the town on a road which one might well fear to go along alone at night, and she continued in her attempts to stop me, and I, for my part, continued to attend those gatherings until, by the grace of God, she gave her full consent, and there was nothing to mar our love for each other, which remained unclouded until the day of her death in 1332, when I was 46. As to my attendance at lessons, it did not amount to much, as it was only possible now and then in between work, and if I had not had a certain natural aptitude and understanding, I should not have gained anything worth speaking of. But I was very much addicted to learning and would sometimes steep myself in books the whole night, and I was helped in these nocturnal studies by a sheikh whom I used to bring back to our house. After this had been going on for several months, my wife took offense, I was married at the time, and claimed divorce from me on the grounds of my not giving her rights, and she had, in fact, some cause to complain. My attendance at lessons, such as it was, did not go on for as much as 2 years. It nonetheless enabled me to grasp some points of doctrine, in addition to what I gained in the way of mental discipline. But it was not until I had busied myself with the doctrine of the folk, al-qawm, which means basically tasawwuf, uh, I had come to know its masters, that my mind opened and I began to have a certain breadth of knowledge and understanding. It says, at this point, the scribe to whom this was dictated asked him about how he first came into contact with those who followed this path. He said, my first leaning in that direction was marked by my attachment to one of the masters of the Isawiyya, who impressed me by unworldliness and evident piety. I made every effort to comply with the requisites of that order, and this came quite easily to me on account of my youth and the instinctive attraction for wonders and marvels, which is part of human nature. So they were into, like, doing unique things, basically. You can call them that. I became proficient in these practices and was well thought of by men of the order. And I believed, in my ignorance, that what we did was purely and simple a means of drawing near to God. On the day when Allah willed that I should be inspired with the truth, we were at one of the gatherings, and I looked up and saw a paper that was on one of the walls of the house we were in, and my eye lit on a saying that was traced back to the Prophet ﷺ. What I learned from it caused me to give up what I had been doing in the way of working wonders, and I don't know if he's going to mention here, but they were into snake charming. Stuff that was happening in the Islamic world back in those days. swallowing blades, doing stuff with fire, and thinking that this was, wonders of spirituality and karamat. He said, what I learned caused me to give up what I was doing in the way of working wonders, and I determined to limit myself in that order to the litanies and invocations and recitations of the Quran. From that time, I began to extricate myself and to make excuses to my brethren until I finally gave up those other practices altogether. I wanted to drag the entire brotherhood away from them also, but that was not easy. So it was a whole group, and he discovered that it wasn't the right thing to do, and so he was trying to get everyone away from it. And this happens, and there are a lot of false, like we would say, false and Sufi groups that are just not what we would consider truth. So he says, as for myself, I broke away as I had intended, and only retained from that contact the practice of snake charming. I continued to charm snakes by myself or with some of my friends until I met Sheikh Muhammad al-Buzidi. All right, so he's snake charming for fun, I guess. I mean, they didn't have a lot of other things to do, but I guess that's what they were doing for fun. As to my meeting with this sheikh, whichever way I look at it, it seems to me to have been a pure grace from Allah. For although that is, I and my friend Sidi al-Hajj ibn Auda, who shared my business with me, were longing to find someone who could take us by the hand and guide us. We did not go to Sheikh al-Buzidi and seek him out, but it was he who came to us quite unexpectedly. My friend had already told me about him. He said, I used to know a sheikh called Sidi Ahmad of the family of the Prophet ﷺ. He left his home and went for several years to Morocco. When he returned, many people attached themselves to him. He used to speak with authority about the path, but to try him, Allah sent him against him a man who did much harm to him, so that he found himself faced with all sorts of opposition. And now he is as subdued as any disciple without a trace of his former spiritual activity. And this happens to people. They do well in the path, then Allah Ta'ala sends them a test. Okay? Sends them some tests, and they can't do any activity. And there's a reason that Allah Ta'ala takes away all their activity. There's a wisdom behind this. Right? Sometimes they have to devote themselves to something more private. He says, however, I think that he is one who could be relied on for guidance upon the path. No true spiritual guide has ever appeared whom Allah did not test with someone who wronged him either openly or behind his back. This was the gist of what he said, and I immediately determined to go to the sheikh on my friend's recommendation. I myself knew nothing about him, except that once when I was a boy, I had heard his name in connection with an illness which I had. They brought me an amulet and said, this is from Sidi Ahmad Sheikh Buzidi, and I used it and was cured. All right, you're probably asking, amulets, isn't this haram? Well, no, in the Maliki fiqh, it's written in the Risala of Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani that the pieces of paper in which are written the Quran and dhikr are recommended to have for those who are sick. And Abdullah bin Umar even has narrated that for children, he used to have the Quran written and then wrapped up and then worn on them like a necklace. And so that maybe not amulet's not the right word, but they call it hijab. Right? They used to call this a hijab, which is basically a barrier. And so Ibn Abi Zayd al-Qayrawani says in his Risala that if it contains the Quran and the dhikr of Allah Ta'ala, then it's wrapped in leather, okay? So that the person could walk around, you don't want the words themselves hanging around, then this is actually recommended, not just permitted, recommended. So he says, my friend and I were at work together some days after this conversation when suddenly he said, look, there is that sheikh going down the road, walking. Then he went up to him and asked him to come in, which he did. They talked for a while, but I was too busy with my work to be able to notice what they were talking about. When the sheikh got up to go, my friend begged him not to stop visiting us. Okay. He said goodbye and went, and I asked my friend what impression he had had. And he said his talk is far above what one finds in books. He came to us from time to time, and it was my friend who talked to him and replied him copiously with questions, whereas I was more or less tongue-tied, partly out of reverence for him, and partly because my work left me no time to talk. One day when he was with us in our shop, the sheikh told me, I have heard that you can charm snakes and you are not afraid of being bitten. I admitted to this. Then he said, can you bring me one and charm it here in front of us? I said that I could, and going outside the town, I searched for half the day, but only found a small one, about half an arm's length. This I brought back with me, and putting it in front of him, I began to handle it according to my custom, while he sat and watched. Could you charm a bigger snake than this? He said. I replied, the size makes no difference to me. Then he said, I will show you one that is bigger than this and far more venomous. And if you can take hold of it, then you are a real sage. I asked him to show me where it was. And he said, I mean your nafs, which is between the two sides of your body. Its poison is more deadly than a snake's. And if you can take hold of it and do what you please with it, you are, as I have said, a sage indeed. Then he said, go and do with that little snake whatever you usually do with them, and never go back to such practices again. And I went out wondering about the soul and how its poison could be more deadly than a snake's. Sometimes they use the word soul as a translation of nafs. Another day during this period, when the sheikh used to call on us, he fixed his eyes on me and then he said to my friend, the lad is qualified to receive instruction, or he would be receptive to instruction, or some such remark. And on another occasion, he found a paper in my hand on which was written something in praise of Sheikh Muhammad ibn Isa. And looking at it, he said to me, if you live long enough, you will be, God willing, like Sheikh Muhammad ibn Isa, or you will attain his rank. I forget his exact words. This seemed to me a very remote possibility, but I said, God willing. And it was not long before I was attached to his order and took him as a guiding light in the path of Allah. My friend had already been received in the order about 2 months previously, though he had kept this from me and told me after I myself had been received. I did not understand at the time the reason for this secrecy. After the sheikh had transmitted to me the awrad, the litanies of the morning and the evening, he told me not to speak about them to anyone until I tell you. Then in less than a week, he called me to him and began to talk to me about al-Ism al-A'zam, or the supreme name, of Allah, and the method of invoking it. He told me to devote myself to dhikrillah in the way generally practiced at that time. And since he had no special cell or retreat or no zawiyah for people to do dhikr, I was unable to find a place where I could be alone, undisturbed. I complained of this to him, and he said, there's no place for being alone than the cemetery. So I went there alone at night, but it was not easy for me. I was so overcome with fear that I could not concentrate on the dhikr, although for many nights I tried. I complained, and he said, I did not give you an order. I merely said there was no place to be alone better than the cemetery. Then he told me to limit my dhikr to the last third of the night. And so I invoked at night and made contact with him during the day. Either he would come to me or else I would go to him, although his house was not always a good place for meeting on account of the children and for other reasons. In addition to this, at midday, I went on attending the lessons in theology, which I had attended previously. One day, he asked me, what lessons are those that you are attending? I said, they are doctrines of Tawheed, and I am now at the realization of proofs. So this is like ilm al-kalam. He said, Sidi so-and-so used to call it the doctrine of Tawheed. In other words, confusion. Because also, if you're, as an aside note, if you have no need for kalam, you don't need to study those things. It's only us who actually are in dire need of it, for the reason of that we live with atheists and we live with non-believers and we live with people with all sorts of doubts. So for us, it's a guiding light and a necessity. For you're talking 1930s and an entire Muslim city, Muslim youth has no need for these doctrines, so there's no need to go into these things. He added, you had better busy yourself now with purifying your innermost soul until the light of your Lord dawn in it, and you come to know the real meaning of Tawheed. As for scholastic theology, it will only serve to increase your doubts and pile up illusion upon illusion. Finally, he said, you had better leave the rest of those lessons until you are through with your present task, for it is an obligation to put what is more important before what is of lesser importance. No order that he ever gave me was so hard to obey as this. I had grown fond of those lessons and had come to rely on them so much for my understanding of doctrine that I was on the point of disobeying him. But Allah put in my heart this question: how do you know that what you are receiving from Sheikh al-Buzidi is not the kind of knowledge that you're truly seeking, or something even higher than it? Secondly, I comforted myself with the thought that the prohibition was not permanent. And thirdly, I remembered that I had taken an allegiance to obey him. And fourthly, I told myself that perhaps he wanted to put me to a test, to try me, as is the way of the shuyukh. But all these arguments did not stop the ache of sorrow that I felt within me. What sent that away was my spending in solitary invocation the hours which I had previously devoted to reading, especially after I had begun to feel the results of this invocation. As to his way of guiding disciples, stage by stage it varied. He would talk to some about the form in which Adam was created, and to others about the cardinal virtues, and to others about divine actions, each instruction being especially suited to the disciple in question. All right, it's now 5:45, so we've reached our time. The Ishraq goes out at 5:48, and people have work to do, and people have places to go. But so what we'll do now is just look at some of the. We have 2 minutes to look at some of the live chat, all right, and see what's going on. All right, we have some people giving salam. So wa alaikum salam to everyone. And again, if you want a copy of the single documented dhikr, just send an email to mbic.clips@gmail.com, and you'll get a reply with the single Wird al-Latif, Surah Yasin, and the dua after Yasin in one single PDF. Here's a question about life insurance. It is forbidden in all the madhabs. In all the madhabs. The question is, if the insurance is not on a fixed interest rate, instead it is an investment in a company's share and takes the loss and profit. Well, that's different. Right? If it's an investment, we wouldn't really call it a life insurance, because you could lose. So therefore, it's more of an investment, it seems like. Would it be possible to get in touch with a Hanafi Mufti? Yes, I'll type the email for our resident Hanafi Mufti, and that is below. Niyaz Hanan at safinassociety.org. You can email him. Okay. Okay, see some other questions here. I saw some morning Adhkar and its titles. I saw some of the morning Adhkar have titles based on the lecture content. Can you please do it for all the videos? Yes, hopefully we can maybe possibly do that and go back and do that. Abu Iman says, ourselves with those who pray to their Lord morning and evening, desiring his presence, as mentioned in Surah Al-Kahf. And hopefully that will fall into that category of people who remember Allah morning and evening. Today, 2 o'clock, if you can show up at the Safina Society YouTube page, there's going to be an interview with Ashir Kirk. I'm going to be talking to the Tajweed teacher for the latest the semester that we've brought on. And again, this is starting. Registration opens up today. Well, registration's always been open, but we're now announcing all the classes today. And here it is. We're trying to form an online community, really, that is just humble people studying different works of the deen. That's all it is. So we have a number of classes here. I'm going to be doing Hikam ibn Atta part 2. Mufti Niaz will be doing a hadith course with an ijaza. That's going to be Sunday. He'll start at 2 o'clock and I'll take over at 3 o'clock. Ashir is teaching Thursdays 7 p.m. and Saturdays at 10 a.m. Okay. Tajweed, interactive tajweed, so you'll recite and he'll correct people. If you have tweens, okay, Yusra Kandil, and her class is at, I'll tell you exactly when her class is, Tuesdays 2 p.m. So if there are teens, so this website will be updated Tuesday at 2 p.m. Tweens being 11, 12, 13, 14. And then Ali bin Saad will be doing hadith for youth for high schoolers. So, excuse me, alhamdulillah. And then Ali Batti and Hala and Afnan will be doing fiqh for kids Sunday mornings at 9:30. Okay, you'll notice here some of the classes are on ArcView Plus, and that's the scholarship track. People who are learning to try to actually get on the track of scholarship and what it means to be a student of knowledge. So those are the two different tracks. And students take live classes via Zoom during term time, but then catch up on pre-recorded classes during the breaks. Right, and this is the sign up. Sign up with these are hyperlinked where you can sign up. And then we also have a WhatsApp group that keeps everyone up to date. These are some of the courses that are in, and where there's written ArcView Plus, that's where the class is just part of ArcView Plus. If you're on ArcView Plus, you get everything, and if you're on ArcView, you get everything that's not written ArcView Plus next to it. If you have any questions, you contact myarcview@safinasociety.org. All right, are there any other, if there are no other questions, inshallah, we could stop here. Jazakumullah khairan. We'll pick up this biography tomorrow, inshallah. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta. Nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk. Wal asr, innal insana lafi khusr. Illa alladhina amanu wa aminu as-salihat. Wa tawassaw bil haqq. Wa tawassaw bis sabr. Wassalamu alaikum.